Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Now, this is an interactive workshop. I'm here live. If you were there like in the morning and you all were looking at a videotape, and I mean, not a videotape, I'm letting y'all see how old I am. You were looking at a recording of me, and here I am live, so you can interact with me. And and hopefully we'll have a well, I
Can you
think
hear us?
we'll have yeah, I can hear you. So I hope we'll have
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I'll behave.
All right, now you behave. I don't want to be
I'll
that.
try.
I don't want to be that Ladonna. You know what I mean? That's a different
Yes, ma'am.
Ladonna. Okay. How's it going so far? Is this your first? I know this is the first live session, but you've gone. Have you all gone to other recorded sessions?
I saw your one this morning. It was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I appreciate that.
I ordered 2 copies of that book.
Oh, wonderful. Resma Menikim's book.
One for,
That's
yes, one for
that's a
me and one for a friend.
that's an awesome book. Oh, you just gave me chills. I love it. I love it. Deb, how long do we wait to start?
You can start now.
Okay. All right. Well, greetings, everyone. My name is LaDonna Sanders Redmond, and we're going to talk about co-op equity and DEI every day. And I'm going to share my screen. Couple things. Tell me where y'all are from. Hit me in the chat, um, and just say, you know, I'm from here. I'm from, there. Tell me something just briefly. Are you in this? What stage are you in your co-op development? Are you all just having, focus groups? You looking for a site? You have a site? You raising money? Let me know who you are and what is going on at your co-op. And what your co-op work. All right. And while y'all do that, I am going to share my screen. Deb, are you staying around? Can you keep time for me? I never know how long it's.
I can do that.
That would be great. And
Okay.
fantastic. All right. So here we go. I always have more slides than I need. Um, and hopefully we'll get through all of them because I wanted to give a presentation that was more about your organizational development. And if many of you are in the early stages of your development work, I mean your organizational work and your new co-op, and you obviously this is up and coming, so um, or you're just organizing and just thinking about it, this is a fantastic opportunity to start thinking about what your organizational culture should be like if you want to be a great workplace, and have great food and help the community. Sometimes we forget that our co-ops, we spend so much time talking about the food and getting the food, but we're a workplace as well, and we are a community partner. So we really do have a high standard to rise to as we begin our DEI work. If you saw my presentation this morning, thank you so much for going. I'm not really going to go a whole lot into my background. I am going to say that I live in Minneapolis now. I am from Chicago. Most people know me as a food justice activist. Um, about 20 years ago, we began converting vacant lots to urban farm sites on the west side of Chicago. And we started the farmers market there. We were the first farmers market to have EBT access in the state of Illinois. And we also wanted to build a grocery store. And the bottom fell out in 2008 in the economy, and all the money went away. And so I did not realize that dream of building a grocery store in an African American community until I moved to Minneapolis. I started working for Stewart Community Co op, helped them build their second store. It's called the Friendship Store. The Friendship Store is about 5 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. So, this is a community that I have spent a lot of time in working with a lot of people. Um, Right now, I no longer work for the co-op. Let me in between time, I was the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager and helped them create the organizational culture whereby they could be more inclusive. Basically, Stewart started with a co-op of about 14% Black, Indigenous people of culture. And by the time we opened the store, the co op was at about 35%, with the new store having 60% Black, Indigenous people of color on staff and working. And since that time, many of those folks, some of them have left, and the ones have stayed, have been promoted. The second in charge of the co op, you all may know, Ray Williams. Ray is the operations manager. There are many people throughout the organization where inclusion is happening. So that's an important aspect of the work. So I just want to give you that background. Today, I am a consultant. I started my own business and I work through Colluminate, which is a cooperative of consultants that work on all kinds of organizational issues, specifically at co-ops. But I work with schools and restaurants and all kinds of other security firms, all kinds of other organizations as I help them with diversity. So, with that, I just want to say two more things. One, if you can mute yourself, it won't distract me. And I'm at that age where I'm easily distracted, sort of like a 3-year old. And the second thing is if you have a question for me, you can put it in the chat. I do have my chat window open, and you can just unmute yourself and say, "Hey, LaDonna, what you say? Say, can you say that again?" I'm happy to stop and and chit chat. All right. Um, so this is not going to be a DEI presentation where I'm going to tell you definitions of DEI. This is not that presentation. If you need that, like I said, ask me. But this is really about the approach to DEI and really understanding what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to operate. So DEI every day is really to understand that one, DEI is a continuum. You're not gonna get any place that you have arrived. This is continuous work, and so you have to understand that the only way to reach equity is to be deliberate about equity. Um, I can't stress that enough. So could you please mute yourself? That's okay, I got you. Um, the um, the reason that you have to think of it as a journey and a process is because the issues that create the need to have DEI are systemic. And so we're going to have to address this. You have to be deliberate about how you change or create your organizational culture. Before I go further, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm on. I know that you all, if like I said, some of you told me you went to the workshop this morning. So I was not there. I was recorded. So it's my responsibility to let you know that I still today stand on Dakota land, and I'm very grateful for the folks who steward this land and have stewarded this land through their many generations. And the Ojibwe and other indigenous nations are also included in that group of folks who stewarded this land. It's really important to note that while we are here and today and we don't see we weren't present for the atrocity, we must recognize that that genocide and ethnic cleansing is still a part of how that land was acquired. And through all of that, even though we may call these states we're in various names, we have to acknowledge that this always will be indigenous land. And if you have done it already today, um, don't worry about it. But if you haven't acknowledged the land that you're on, this is a great time to put that in the chat. What land do you stand on today? We must remember Indigenous people and celebrate them and hold them up around their sovereignty and their right to be on this land. I also recognize my own lineage, which is African. Um, I am grateful for those that crossed in the Ma'afa or in the trading of people known as Africans. Um, those folks are my ancestors. Some of them I can call the name of, and some of them I cannot. But I am very grateful to be here with you all on their shoulders. I stand. The genocide of the Native Americans and the atrocities committed against them, plus the atrocities committed against the Africans, are the foundation of the United States and the foundation of capitalism. And so we want to hold fast the acknowledgement that these two things together, these two atrocities, enslavement of the Africans and the theft and genocide of indigenous people, created the wealth that we stand on today. And so we must say their names, right? So now we are moving into a contemporary time where so many people are killed by police violence. And so we have to remember their names. If you ever get a chance to go to this website, theirnames.org, you can find so many names that are not in the media who have been killed in police custody. And this is a contemporary list within the past several years of people who were killed in police custody. And of course, we seek justice for all of them, and especially our dear brother George Floyd, who was murdered in police custody. So I take a somatic approach to this work. And after that, I just want to encourage you to breathe. Put your pen down and just take in some air, because that's a lot. We have invoked, all of our ancestors. And I don't know about you, but I feel them here with us today. One of the main things I want you to understand is that organizational development is DEI work. Organizational development is diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So as you are putting your organizational structure together, determining your leaders, figuring out how to write your job descriptions, figuring out how to hire, all of that is culture and builds culture in the organization. And so we have to recognize that that is where our opportunity is to create a diverse and inclusive cooperative. And I'm going to specifically be talking about the cooperative as a workplace because that is your responsibility as leaders of the co-op. And you will spend quite a bit of time understanding not just how to manage products, but how to manage people. So we know that we have this interesting situation here, right? That most organizations have some idea that they would benefit from being inclusive, but folks haven't figured out how to actually implement diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it really gets a bad rap because folks tend to just stay focused on trainings. And then after the training is done, they're like, okay, well, we got trained, but nothing has happened. Well, that's because there is an after training step. And this is what you all are getting. You're getting the after you take diversity training, after you come back from all of that talking and sitting and playing games and stuff, this is what you have to do. You have to implement your training in a very deliberate and strategic way. And I'm just filling in the gap for you so that you understand that that is the case. You will not be training by itself does nothing. It's like a hammer laying on a table. A hammer is not going to it's not going to jump up and start nailing stuff in the wall. You have to pick up the hammer and you have to use it. And you can only really use it for a nail. Well, you could use it for other things, but that I digress. You know what I mean. You could also use something else to hammer with, and we know that that's not effective. So the right tool for the right job is really an important concept in DEI work. So we also know that there's some complications, and I just kind of went into one of them. Another one is that DEI is just really super complex, and it can be nuanced. And what do I mean? Sometimes it's like well, we want to have a diverse and inclusive and equitable world, and most people don't understand that you have to be, one, deliberate, and two, that we all have biases and they all have to be worked around in order to have a workplace. So there's an idea here that the only differences that make a difference are the ones that make a difference to you. But the reality is that differences make a difference, and that difference could be anything. It doesn't just have to be race. It could be gender. It can be sexual orientation. It could be education or geography. You all know that you can have conversations with people and everybody in the room is alike until one topic comes up. For example, I could be in a room full of Black people and pretty much it'd be okay. We all right. And then the difference, because being Black don't make a difference in a room full of Black folk. But we could start talking about something, politics, sports. These things are differences that can make a difference. The other issue with DEI work is that oftentimes it's regulated to a part of an organization where it's isolated. And so you really don't want to do that. You really want to be able to have your DEI work take a place front row center in your leadership, in your workplace development, and in your overall strategy development. So the solution here is that basically you have to create a strategy, a DEI strategy that addresses your challenges. You can't just deal with what's going on right now currently. That comes into play, but you also have to have organizational data. You need to maybe do a few focus groups. I'm sure many of you all have done that with talking to people in your community. And in order to actually implement, you have to have a team in your organization that will lead this work. That's the other piece about DEI work. Either it's siloed or nobody's taking responsibility for it. So you need to create, it doesn't have to be a giant team, it can be a small team, but you have to have a team. Again, you have to be strategic. So that's the solution. Two solutions, I'm sorry, to making your DEI work stick, or thinking about your DEI work. And then the last piece is understanding that organizations have cycles, and as well as your employees. So all of your initiatives around DEI will kind of shift depending on where your employees are. So, for example, what you're using to hire someone or recruit someone is not the same strategy that you're going to use to keep your alumni staff connected to the organization. These are two different folks, even though they're both employees, who have two very different needs. So, taking an approach here to the DEI work. Excuse me. What happened? Oh. Yeah, it's going to be that day today. I can see that coming. Okay. Hold on one second. Got a lot of stuff going on my screen. All right. Taking a planned approach and start with your DEI strategy before embedding inclusion into your culture. All right. Why is that important? Well, one is that you can get real performative if you're trying to just bring people in because you just want to be included. So you're kind of taking advantage of people, just kind of using them to see, like, hey, see, we did the diversity work. So we've got, all the crayons in the crayon box here. So we're good. That shouldn't come first because it's harmful. Because if you don't have a culture, or you have a culture that's really heavily connected to dominant culture, you run the risk of creating more harm. And then and if you create harm as a co-op, you will damage your reputation. So you want to build your strategy first, and you really want to get clear roles and accountability. You want to be specific about the goals and initiatives, and you really want to understand what are your DEI needs and challenges specifically. So first piece is strategy. Second piece is culture. And it's really important to understand that. Now, oftentimes I'll tell you that in an organization, if you don't change the culture, the strategy is not gonna work. So if you get into a groove with your hiring, and you're not working on diversity and inclusion, and run into a situation where it becomes clear that that should be an objective of your organization, you won't be able to out strategize it at that point. So that's a different conversation. Right. So I'm going to share with you today a 4-step process to starting your DEI work. Basically the assessment that I'm talking to you about is it is a data assessment. You can also take an assessment tool. I use the Intercultural Development Inventory, or the IDI, to assess the state of an organization or where people are on their cultural competency process. But there's all sorts of data to look at, particularly when you're talking about hiring and trying to set hiring goals. So you need to take a look at all of that. Determine the purpose of your DEI work. What are you trying to do? And you do need to be specific. Are you trying to connect to, are you trying to hire for diversity? Even if you're trying to expand the supply chain and you want to have diverse vendors, etc. We want to be sure that you have a purpose and that you're anchored in that, because if you're not, you'll end up anywhere, and that's not really what you're trying to get. I'm looking at my chat here regarding the comment about HR. DEI should not be treated like we have to take a harassment class or get our food handlers card. No, DEI is obviously so much more than that. You're right. Thanks, Sheila. This one is from Lee. Can you repeat that acronym, the tool you use to assess where an organization is at with a DEI? It's called Intercultural Development Inventory. It's called the IDI. I think you can go to IDI.com, or if you Google Intercultural Development Inventory, you can go right to the organization's website. The third step is to determine the leadership model, and then select the DEI initiatives, and then plan to launch the DEI strategy. So to create this DEI strategy, one of the things that people oftentimes try to skip is they can do it without the leaders. It's next to impossible to change an organization without the leadership. So the leadership has to be involved. And then you have to anchor your DEI strategy with your purpose, or some of you all may use policy governance. So you have an end statement, your strategic pillars, and then your DEI initiatives. That's what creates your strategy. Leadership is what is the wheel that makes it go. So step one, I'm just going to talk briefly about the assessments. So this is a slide with a lot of stuff on it. I am not going to read to you today, but I want to direct your attention to the left side of the screen. You'll see data sources, and then you'll see another line for analyze the data. So what this is basically saying is that you can take a data source like engagement data, if your co-op is already operating, And you can review that data for drivers or questions regarding DEI in the workplace, right? And then if you wanted to analyze that data, you can just look at it from a demographic standpoint. And so you can do that whether you're talking about looking at your new hire data or your exit data. You could look at your current DEI training programs to determine what is going on, what happened here. You can see, analyze the data for determining if the content is comprehensive and if it had an impact on participants' behavior. That's the other thing. You have to be able to judge whether something is actually helpful to you as in terms of its DEI training. Or you can look at workforce demographics. I mentioned that a lot. You can review the current level of diversity in your workforce and see where there are gaps. Oh, someone posted the intercultural development inventory. Yeah, great. Thank you. So when you are doing your DEI strategy, um, you have to address specific things. Um, things will come up, right? So like this example here, if you're doing exit surveys and they show a higher turnover of Black, Indigenous, this is people of culture, color. I say people of culture because it's more, anyway, we'll talk about that later. The strategy must address how to retain those employees. So you use your data to not just have it in search of a purpose, but you use your data and you find purpose in your data. And if you're seeing that kind of data, then you know, oh, we need a strategy to, one, understand what's going on here and make a focus, to give our attention to retaining Black, Indigenous people and culture. So there's also external data. So that was internal data, but there's external data. There's political data, there's technological data, and there's also, social data. So being able to have data that cuts across these 3 or 4, and economic data, 4 areas is really important. And this sounds like a lot, but you do this all the time, but you don't really do it in a way that is strategic. We always are talking about the social environment or the economic environment or the political environment or the technological environment. And in this process, you have to do it deliberately. So these are just a few questions. In the political landscape, what are the narratives and discourse on DEI? It's really important, particularly when this other person was president of the United States. They were very clear about not wanting to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So we knew that there was some precariousness going on when it comes to the government and DEI. And that can translate into some standoffish kind of behavior from people who rely on funding to do DEI work. Economics. What emerging economic disruption will impact impact DEI at your organization? And here the example is recession impacts diversity recruiting. Well, COVID-19 was an economic disruption as well as a public health disruption. Deb, can you tell me what time? What's my time like? If anybody can tell me what time the workshop is scheduled to end, I want to be sure that I don't, miss an opportunity to chat with you all if you have questions for me. In the social environment, you're talking really about what are the barriers for folks who are employees. And of course, you're taking into account social movements that are currently taking place. It ends at okay, so it's 10:30, so we have a little bit of time. And then there's also the legal issues. What are the minimum requirements established by government for DEI work? Someone mentioned, being able to have your food handling license, that's one. I guess you could look at that. But there's also, sexual harassment training. There is which is mandatory. There are federal laws that prohibit workplaces from acting a particular kind of way, which is the next question, the labor laws. So there's a lot going on in your co-op that you have to pay attention to. And that will be a challenge because there's so much going on at the co-op. And so always there's this issue with what to do first, what gets most attention. And oftentimes DEI work kind of gets pushed to the background. But if you really are doing DEI work in a way, it doesn't move from your agenda because it is the agenda. It is always operating in the background. Technological, which takes me to the technological piece. Technology and artificial intelligence is really a big thing, particularly in Black, Indigenous, people of culture communities, because artificial intelligence has been used to extend policing efforts. And so there is a tremendous amount of fear around how technology will be used. So perhaps in your store, you might have cameras. And what do you do with those cameras? Who's watching those cameras? Why do you have cameras? Those are questions that you have to think about, not that you don't do it. Also, your point of sale system will collect data about folks. Will you use that data? Will you sell that data? Will you communicate about things with people beyond the co-op? How will you ask them for permission? All of these things are important questions in the DEI landscape. So it's, again, we're not just talking exclusively about the race or class or gender. We're talking about the overall culture of equity at this point. And so organizations are on somewhat of a journey, and this is 5 stages of the journey. So I'm gonna go through these quickly, but I want you to take a look and I want you to put in the chat, where do you think your organization is when it comes to DEI work? And you know what? I didn't ask y'all one question, so I'm gonna have to ask you another question after that. But first, let's do this question. So, undeveloped, no programs, no policies in place, leadership or leadership is not interested. There's no commitment to address DEI challenges. So if you're in that, and then you don't want to tell anybody, you can just send it to me. I won't call you out. Basic, and what I shouldn't say that. If you don't have a developed strategy and you're in this workshop, then something brung you here, right? So just be honest about that. Like, no, we still trying to figure it out. Everybody say we should do this thing. Don't know how to do this thing. Then you're in the right place. And so go ahead and do your thing. Basic, no formal programs or policies in place. DEI mainly addressed for compliance purposes. Ownership falls within HR. Emergent, no overarching DEI strategy. Ad hoc DEI initiatives occur independently or at department levels. Leaders recognize benefits of DEI and take some responsibility to encourage DEI efforts. Integrated, overarching DEI strategy in place. Leaders are accountable for and committed to modeling inclusive behavior. DEI is tracked and measured, and then strategic is overall overarching DEI strategy is also in place here. The DEI work is strategic. It's ingrained in the organizational culture, structures, systems, processes, programs, policies, and behaviors. It's a critical component that drives the organizational strategy. All right, let me see who I got here. I got some babies. Oh, I got some beginning folks, and you're in the right place. That's good. That's good. Grant at the Chicago market. Hey, Chicago market. Basic, between basic and emergent. Okay, that makes sense. And that's a good thing to also remember. You could be, in an in-between place. I didn't really create this to make people feel like I gotta do that. I gotta find my place in it. Hard to admit, yeah, that it's undeveloped. But I think the reality of this work right here is that you got to be honest. If you're not going to tell yourself the truth, you already are off to a bad start. And most times, that kind of truth telling is coupled with the idea that um, conflict is a problem. And so people kind of want to stay comfortable rather than challenge themselves because they just are, I don't want to use the word afraid of conflict, but are uncomfortable with conflict. So that's that's the nature of this. But you can't change a thing that you won't address. All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide. I do want you all to put something else in the chat if you can. What made you come to this session, or what do you most want to know? That's what I meant to ask you. What do you most want to know about DEI work? So DEI work, as I've talked to you about earlier, is work that does need leadership commitment. There's 3 models, maybe more, but I really wanted to get you to see that there are multiple ways to do the work, and all leaders are not the same. And so, when you're talking about Model A, for example, you're talking about executive support, and the executive is the lead, is a champion of the work. There's dedicated manager and resources, and there's other DEI efforts. Then underneath that, you see activities. So I'll let you look at the activities yourself, because one of the ones that I want to focus on here is employee resource groups, or affinity groups as they used to be called. Model B, executive support with same thing, executive support and champion, DEI committee, and employee resource groups. Now, employee resource groups are really an important opportunity to coordinate with your staff their support of the DEI initiative, because you do need support from your workers, but also to get feedback into the organization to find out how the DEI initiatives are going. So in Model B, the employee research groups implement the initiatives with the support of the DEI committee. Model C, pretty much the same as Model B. There might be DEI committees and subcommittees, might be focused on a particular kind of business, like there might be a supply chain diversity committee, and there might be a hiring committee, etc. The executive sponsors or champions, though, activities here are the ones who make the decision along with the DEI champions. The committee continues to work on the processes and designs, and then the subcommittees and employee research groups implement the initiatives. So there's different ways of thinking about how to lead your DEI initiatives. One of the things that often comes up when I'm doing work with folks is that they feel like DEI work is it's not just a different goal or different priority, it's like an aside. And so when you're doing your DEI work, it's really important to align the DEI work with your organization's strategic goals and priorities, right? So you can have these strategies here in terms of alignment. And then you see here where you can evaluate areas with the alignment, the talent, organizational strategy. But where I really want to put your attention is, how do you identify the DEI implications of your strategic goals and priorities? So here, the strategic goal for around corporate responsibility is serve a large customer base by providing personalized solutions, right? That can be a strategy, right? And then you have a DEI implication: improve customer awareness and competencies to recognize the diversity of the customer base. So you can get very specific as to your strategic goal and then your DEI implementation, right? there's the strategic goal here, expand markets over the next 3 to 5 years. Well, you can have a DEI implication in that to hire diverse groups, and encourage people to refer folks, and give them rewards for that. You can also evaluate for bias, or hire for cultural competency in the selection process. So I think you all, get the idea here. I'm gonna look at the chat for a second. Okay, what made folks attend? Chris, what made me attend? I know y'all can read these yourself, but I'm reading them, so I don't want to be just sitting here reading and y'all looking at me. We have an opportunity to completely restructure our organization and build in an anti-racist, anti-oppression. That is fantastic. This is the perfect workshop for you. Lois is at a startup with less than 5% diverse community, personally very committed to cultural diversity in our community. Oops. I mess with this mouse too much. Okay. Let's see. Lois said in the disability session, it's easier to build an ADA compliant website than to fix a non-compliant. Yeah, it's always easier to build something than to try to fix it, right? And if you start with DEI and you embed that in your organizational culture as a part of your organizational development, and you're doing that work alongside, then you don't have to go back and do it again. Sheila's here to just learn what DEI is. Fantastic. I'm glad about that. That's good. Good stuff. Is it Tanya? Tana? Tana? I'm gonna have to learn how to pronounce Tania. Tania? I hope I'm saying it right. I apologize, but you can unmute yourself and tell me how to say your name. All right, so y'all had the spread them out approach. Each person in our group chose different sessions looking to learn more about co-ops and gain understanding from the ground up. Thanks for coming. Lori Green, as a Black board chair of a predominantly white co-op, I want to make sure I get it right. I am usually the one that is the DEI meter in our group. Okay, got you. I am also the president of a co-op that is, you know what, I can't even say it's primarily white anymore. Our board is a majority women of color, most women of African descent, and mixed ethnicities. So, we've come a long way in the past 7 or 8 years. Right, everybody need to put on their DEI hat. Yes, Lee wants to get practical examples of how food co-ops can and have gone deeper than performative. I'm curious about your take on the DEI team. I've heard people talk about how words like inclusion are problematic because it seems to indicate that folks in power with systemic privilege are allowing other folks in, thus maintaining existing power systems. I think you have to do the work. That's what I actually think. I think inclusion in my world means that people are in power positions. So if you just have diversity and you just have people at your co-op and all the folks that are at your co-op are cashiers, and cashiering is not bad, don't get me wrong, because when we all had to stay home, the people who had to go to work were the cashiers, or people are baggers. But we just know that folks in those positions, those titles, those jobs don't generally hold power. They don't set the strategic goals and priorities of the organization. So when I'm talking about inclusion, I'm like, where are those people in the organization? So I wouldn't be as proud about the diversity initiative that just had, people on the sales floor. I want to see a co-op that has leadership and strategic leadership, decision-making power in leadership roles of Black, Indigenous, people of culture. And I think this is true whether we're talking about LGBTQIA folks or whether we're talking about other folks of difference. When we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about where are they acquiring power. So I guess I don't really fundamentally agree with the definition of inclusion. So that's my definition, and that's the one that I teach people. So one of the most important things about, and I'm sorry about this slide, it looks like it slipped a little bit, but so I won't spend too much time here. All I wanted you to see here is that you have to have people have to have responsibilities, and there's leadership responsibilities, there's departmental responsibilities, and there's individual responsibilities. To someone's point, who is that? Lori was saying she wants everybody to have their DEI hat on. And that's absolutely right, because everybody has to take responsibility for DEI. Everybody has a role to play. So you can customize this and make it, what fits your co-op, but no one gets left out of taking responsibility for the DEI initiatives. So step 3, determine the governance model and select the DEI initiatives. So we kind of have gone a little bit back and, back and forth, but we talked about this, creating a plan to execute the DEI strategy. And you also don't just want to have it sit on a shelf. It has to be a living kind of document. But you want to be specific. Who is going to do what? And when is it going to happen? That's what this slide is all about. You have to have a plan to execute. So you can't just have a plan that doesn't get executed. Well, you can, but that's not going to get you done. You have to execute the plan, and folks have to be responsible for it. You got to engage your stakeholders. You got to make sure that you know when it starts and when it ends. And we're going to get into measurements in a little bit. Amanda says, we're ready to bake it in early. That's right. That's what's up. But we're having trouble finding guidance on how to do that. We're about to write our employee handbook for examples. And where can we look for coaching or examples? Well, you're doing that. That's what you're doing here. So when you're going to meet a lot of people. There's lots of consultants here who do this work. But first things first is, really know what you're trying to accomplish, and then start looking for your consultant. But you're in the right place. So this will get the wheel spinning. You can also call on other co-ops. Some might share their employee handbook, and you have like a template to work with. Cooperatives are co-op folks are some of the most generous people in terms of their business structures and strategies that they use. They share their successes as well as lessons from, things that didn't go so well. So don't be afraid to reach out to a co-op that's existing, particularly if you have relationships with them, and ask for their help. Don't have to do it alone. So there's a point at which you actually need to select the DEI initiatives. So, and this is kind of what I was just breaking down, but it's more specific on the initiative. What is the initiative? What does it look like in practice? Who will own this initiative? And what will this initiative achieve? This is very important because, again, DEI work can get really airy-fairy. It's like, oh, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. No, it really is not. It really is about creating, I'm sorry, going back here. All right. Not sure what is going on here, but I have gone way away from where I was at. All right. So being clear about the initiative and answering these questions will get you the kind of accountability that you need. We talked about milestones. We kind of went through this just a slide ago. Who's going to hold responsibility? Who's going to be the leaders? And then where are you going to get the resources? Who's going to actually do the training? Like Amanda is talking about the employee handbook. Well, we're writing an employee handbook, and perhaps a task for someone on your team is like, okay, we need you to make sure that we have these anti-racist policies. Does anybody write those? Where are those at? Can you go out and find out how, where a template might be? So you assign somebody that, and they go and they do that research and that work. So there's lots of ways to think about goals and metrics that measure up, but basically you have some strategic pillars, if you will, that will achieve the equity that you want. And so this one focuses on equitable treatment. You need to have goals, and then you need to have the measure. Thanks, Deb. Um, Gender, the metrics here under equitable treatment: have an environment that ensures all employees are rewarded equally for their work. But then you're going to talk about making sure that there's no gender gap, gender wage gap, no racial wage gap, and that employee satisfaction with pay and fairness. So they feel that they're getting paid fairly. And then the other one around equitable treatment is flexible work hours. So what you're going to look at for the data is work environment, engagement, driver scores. You're going to look at the number of personal days taken off, and also the turnover rates that cite flexibility as an issue. We talked a little bit about reviewing the legal and ethical requirements around storing sensitive information when selecting these metrics. So when you start to collect data, you do have to think about that backdrop, that people are going to give you information that they don't necessarily want shared. And if your co-op is small, it might be easier to find out who gave this answer in an anonymous survey. So you want to always be mindful of how you collect this data and how that data is used and who gets to see the actual raw data. More about the DEI initiatives and how to select them. So selecting initiatives is really important because you do have to work around negative biases, and heretics is like the way that people learn hands-on, but there's a way to have people learn hands-on that's really harmful and negative. And so you want to select initiatives that are going to combat those kinds of things. And then you also want to build up your environment that supports your values. And you want to avoid tokenizing people for their identity. So there's lots of ways to measure your DEI strategy, but you also have to think about iterations of it, right? So it's almost like you'll think about this in a cyclical kind of way. So people, you'll get some data, you'll learn something, and then you're like, oh wait, I've learned something that needs to modify our initial construct, and that's fine. But that's that's the learning cycle right there. This talks about the value proposition in the strategy. And so being able to attract diverse groups of candidates and reinforce that DEI work is an organizational priority. So you have to build that language into every aspect of the work that you do. So when you're hiring, you interview people and you're asking them a question, then you're telling them a lot about the work, but you're also asking them, well, how do you perceive yourself as a person? What's your experience with diversity or inclusion? Or tell me a time when you've had to work with someone who's different than you. And then you find out a lot about people when they they go to answer those questions. The main thing here, sorry. The main thing here is to be cautious about performative allyship, right? So you don't want to you don't want to make the place seem like it's, I don't know, what am I trying to say? You don't want to make your work, you don't want to tell people, you don't want to mislead people with your diversity initiative. That's what I'm trying to say. So you want to be inspirational, but you don't want to be, painting these rosy pictures. So as a, ally, you want to be careful that you're genuine in your delivery of what the values proposition is for the employee. You can use focus groups with your employees to clarify that. This is just a slide about how to do focus groups. I'm sure you all have done them because it's really important to understand, that you want to be intentional and you really want to address people's needs. I mentioned employee resource groups, and I think I just really wanted to be sure to help people, one, understand that employee resource groups are usually made up of folks who are Black, Indigenous, people of culture. And so you want to be sure that these folks don't do all the heavy lifting in your organization, and that the burden of creating an inclusive culture and holding that culture accountable is not solely on their shoulders. So you don't want to overburden them and make them accountable for the DEI outcomes and not the leadership. So when we talk about leadership, there's 3 levels of activity, and we've gone through this. So just to wrap it up: setting the strategy, designing and building, and then implementing to create alignment with your strategic priority. And you have to figure out that leadership model that I showed you earlier, and that will be along the lines of your DEI maturity level, right? Your organization's maturity. This slide sets out the DEI leadership activities. So when you talk about setting the strategy, what does that look like? Designing and building is the process and procedures for actually creating and implementing DEI work. And then the implementing, which is actually carrying out, of course, the activities. And then it could also include, things that are not customer focused, but really basically around your data collection and other kinds of initiatives. So when we start to talk about organizational maturity, so we're talking about age, of course. How old is the organization, right? I don't think we're talking about necessarily, I mean, there's a whole school of thought around this, but I think it's important to understand that, yeah, you're a new and emerging group and you have a small store, less than 100 people, then you're talking about a collective model. You're not talking about a leadership model where there's a whole lot of hierarchy. I mean, generally, if the store is less than 100 people, the general manager might be, the general manager for an hour, but then they're the produce manager for 2, and then they're, at the customer service desk. So they might, they're not just going to go and sit in their office and not really participate. But as the organization grows in size, then you might see that hierarchy. And I'm not just saying hierarchy with people over people, but some strategic decision making where people are the final decision maker. They're the ones that the board hires to actually run the co-op. And so at the end of the day, that manager is at the end of the day responsible for the outcomes. So, but as you change in place of development, you can see here that if you're undeveloped and small, then you have a small leadership model. You kind of stick together there. If you're in that basic category, the same thing. But if you're in an emergent model and you have matured and you're at a level in terms of staffing, 100 to 2,000, then you are thinking about your DEI work. This is about DEI work. Your DEI work in a way that is delegating responsibility. And you can see that from emergent, integrated, and strategic. Let's look at the top line here. So very few of y'all are enterprises, but I would say that in the emergent, integrated, and strategic model, I think you can be, the model here is like a web. I think you can be cross-functional in terms of, and you don't have to have 10,000 staff to do that. But anyway, that was just the data that came out of the study that I was looking at. So looking at this, basically, I'm looking at, the icon here for the model the governance model or the leadership model that you're using. We went through this slide already. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to stop here for a second. I'm almost done with these slides. If you do, put them in the chat. So one of the places to really focus on your DEI work will be on your workplace and particularly your employees. These are the folks that at the end of the day that's going to really do the heavy lifting. These are the folks who are showing up to put the stuff on the shelves and make sure that the payroll is done and that the lights are on. So you have all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. But it's really important to evaluate where your DEI strategy can support your employees, no matter where they are in their life cycle in the organization. And so you can see by the wheel there that there are a number of places that an employee could land, from candidate being attract and recruit to employee. They're onboarding, they're performing, they're growing, and they may be exiting at that point, and then becoming an advocate of the organization and alumni. So these are important stages to know, because every stage won't require the same strategy. So, and you'll use different strategies and you'll try different strategies. They all won't work. So you're going to have to keep trying. These are just some questions that you could really use to think about, to talk with employees from every stage, and really get the information that you want. For example, I'm just going to focus on recruit. Are we interviewing and hiring enough candidates from diverse backgrounds? That's a question, because a lot of times people will come to me and it's like, hey, we want to hire people, but we don't get enough people in our hiring pool. And the question is why? Well, where are you advertising? Who are you talking to? How do people even know that you're hiring? So those are some of the questions. These are some of the questions. Performance. Are people who are in the perform area, are performance reviews as objective as possible? Sometimes people really struggle with performance reviews. I was just with an organization the other day, and they were realigning their performance reviews to reflect their values more. From an organization that has a critical mass of employees who wants to improve their DEI practices, are there any stumbling blocks, challenges you see most often in implementation? Yeah, they try to do too much too soon, and they're not being strategic. That can be a huge stumbling block, because people just want to do the work. This is one of the only fields that I can think of that people just want to do it and they don't know what they're doing. And I think it's a combination of morals. They want to know that they're good people, and they think that this is the way that they can do it, is just to do it and be good people. But as you all know, you're trying to build a grocery store. And so you want to build a grocery store super bad. You got all kinds of people all around you trying to help you build this grocery store. And you will not go out and get a shovel and a hard hat and start digging in somebody's yard talking about you gonna build a grocery store. You will not do that. Why? Well, because it's not strategic and it won't work. So DEI work is just like that. You have to be strategic and you have to do things that make sense. So the stumbling block that I've seen people do is that they want to do too much too soon, and the organization is not ready to do it. So it becomes performative, and they're not resilient enough to defend any of the work that they're trying to do. So Grant says, speaking as a board member who does not hire beyond the GM, it seems like we would expect the GM to develop much of this DEI work. The board assesses the work of the GM. Related, any comments on the DEI work a startup board should be doing? Yeah, there's lots of work that a board should be doing, because you can't hold your DEI, you can't hold your GM accountable. There's a lot of letters there. Your GM accountable for DEI work. You can't hold them accountable if you don't have a commitment as a board to equity. So that's what you have to do. you have to be clear about what the board's commitment to equity is, and then you can offer the GM an executive limitation around equity, or you can craft executive limitations if you use, I don't know if you use policy governance or not, Grant, but if you do, and if anyone does, then you can invite your executive leader to support the equity work within the organization, and then hold them accountable. So one of the things that people want to do is communicate their DEI work. I have never seen so many people want to write public statements after the death of George Floyd, but it was all over the place. People they were calling me. They're like, we want to say something. And I'm like, why? What do you want to say? So it's really important to have a communication strategy that shares your work in really simple, accessible language, but is consistent and timely, open, honest, and it's also two ways. So people get to say back to you what they heard, or what it means to them. And what happens is that people want to skip this, right? They just want to write a statement. It's not timely. They just want to say stuff, or they think it's timely because something has happened and they want to say something. Um, you have to be careful around that performative DEI work, because what will happen is that you'll come off as less than authentic. And again, your reputation is really important. So in closing, I wanted to make sure that we just kind of wrapped it up into these three things. Obviously, DEI work is not one and done initiatives. It's on a continuum. It is a mechanism. The strategy is a mechanism to change or systemic issues that are ingrained in ways that have to be challenged specifically. So you have to be purposeful, and it's got to be your DEI strategy has to be scaled appropriately. Insight 2, one-off and impromptu initiatives, like what I was just talking about, the initiative of the global letter condemning police, and is not enough. You have to actually take some steps to becoming inclusive, and because you can't fix any of the issues that are rooted in our systems without by just writing a letter, or I don't know, having photo ops, things like that. Insight 3 is related to that. Be cautious of becoming a performative ally when branding the DEI strategy. So you really want to be, working to ensure that your strategy is genuine, and whatever you're communicating is authentic. You do not want to try to sell this in a way that lands on someone that's like, well, you're just doing a lot of talking. You're not, that you're not walking the walk. So those of you who might want to work with me, these are 3 categories that I kind of work in. I help people by helping them have like a little toolkit. I can help you with guided implementation, or help you do workshops like this one. And then, of course, I do consulting. And what I have coming up is a couple of classes. You can go to Colluminate.coop and look under events, and you will see Making Change, Implementing DEI Principles for Organizational Impact. It is designed for leaders of the co-op, whether they're on the board or not, or they're in operations, but it will focus on implementing DEI work. So going into great detail about some of the things that I've shared with you here today. And these are those sessions. Session 1 is coming up in a week or so. DEI 101. Second one is addressing unconscious bias, microaggressions in the workplace, bystanders intervention, and communicating across conflict and difference. So that's all I got. Thank you. Hey, what's up? Y'all got questions for me? I can come out of this screen and I can look at y'all and say, hey. All right. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. Um, Andrea, thank you so much. Akua, hi, how are you? Thank you so much, Amanda. Questions, comments? Tell me what's going on. What y'all thinking? We got
Wow.
15 minutes.
This is so cool. I didn't even hear all of it, but I took so many notes. Malik Yakini warned me or prepped me that you were going to be amazing. This was so great. And I'm going to share a lot of this with our operations chairpersons. I'm the board president, but I really want to get this to our operations team.
Mhm.
Be so helpful. And I'll also see if you can check out the class that's coming up at Illuminate. Thank you so much, LaDonna. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Akua. Give Malik my love. And
I will.
yeah, I'm sure he said a lot of things. I won't. We
Oh
won't.
yeah, he loves you.
I love him back. I love him dearly. He's a good brother.
Okay. Thank you.
So proud of y'all work in Detroit. So glad that you all are moving right along. All right, who else? Somebody y'all got some hi, hello. Thanks, Karen.
Hi, LaDonna. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question, which is particularly for a startup board, how do you know when to seek out consulting versus trying things on your own? I can imagine with like an up and running business, it's a lot easier to poll your staff workers, poll your members. But if you're just a board operating, how do you know if you're on the right track versus you need a professional to guide you?
Well, I think if you are really trying to open a store and you don't have the resources, people do contact me and they're at really early stages and they're fundraising. I wouldn't start with me as a consultant. I would start by the way that you start your co-op is by having study circles, right? You all study cooperative principles and you studied values. I would start to study equity, and start to read, get some book, there's so many books available, and look at videos like this together and start to have conversations. Part of I wouldn't say part, if I could tell you, like, boil down all the DEI work that I just went through that's about strategy and this and other, I would tell you that mostly it's about communication. So being able to have a vocabulary that you all can create shared meaning around will help develop the culture that you need to be able to have an inclusive cooperative environment. That's where I would start. I would start the same way that you started. I would start by having conversations and by talking and using video and using YouTube if you don't have the resources to do that, and working with your local community because there are probably people there that are doing equity work, and having them come and talk to you and sharing the co-op model with them and have them share the equity model with you. That's what I would do.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, did y'all get what you came for? If you did, put it in the chat. What did you learn? I usually have, when I'm training people, I usually have them do how, now, wow, right? So how in the world are we going to do that? Now that I heard that, this is what I'm going to do. And wow, that blew my mind. So put that in the chat or come off of the, unmute yourself and tell me, get your how, now, wow. Usually you have to do all three, but I'm going to let y'all do one. You pick one and put that in. How, now, wow.
Hey, LaDonna, Johan Matthews.
Hi, Johan.
Just wanted to just get more of your thoughts on the part that you touched on, which is the fact that maybe that group just hired somebody, right? They're trying to improve their racial equity. So they've got a black guy, gal, whatever on team. And they're trying to have these conversations. And we talked about the burden that, a black person of color, whatever the case is, might feel, especially if they're educated, empathetic, or whatever on the topic. And they're leaned on kind of disproportionately to help lead those conversations. And you want to lead those conversations, but you don't want that to be an extra thing or an extra burden, or you're not being compensated for that in any extra way. You're just kind of showing up and you're part of a team. And you have other people who might be excited to do that, but they don't have the lived experience or whatever the case is. So kind of just navigating that process, that kind of fine line. I don't know, just a little more thought. I don't know.
Sure. So let me be clear. I think all DEI work should be compensated, especially if you're having a Black, Indigenous person of color doing your work. You got to pay. You got to pay something. Maybe you paying in sandwiches because that's all you got, but you got to come up with them sandwiches every day. Every day they got to be on time too. The other thing is that you have to invest in that person. So those are the two things. They have to pay and they have to invest, because our lived experiences as people in Black and brown bodies isn't enough to carry the organization and carry ourselves to. So the investment in you is your training so that you become a technician and an expert for the organization. And that is something that can be transferred. Your lived experience cannot be transferred to the next staff person. You know what I'm saying? I'm not you, but you know what I'm saying. So what has to transfer is the technical know-how and the accountability and the responsibility to continue to do the work. You had another part of that question that was intriguing to me. You talked about other people. Oh, you talked about other people who didn't have the lived experience but were enthusiastic. Well, if you have some capacity to draw them in or send them to do some of the stuff that I was just telling Crest to do with his folk, like, you know, you need to read. You know what I'm saying? You need, you need to, we need to get you together. And if they want you, like I have some friends who I met early on who are working, they're white and in white bodies, and they wanted to be anti-racist. And they asked me to support their work by letting them know when they messed up, not letting them slide, not letting them glide, but, really telling them. And I asked them if that's what they wanted, then they had to be receptive, because I can't be arguing with you about it. If I tell you it's wrong, then it's wrong. That's it. I don't want to talk about it no more. You know what I'm saying? We're not going to fight about it. And they said they could do that. So I would, if people want that, you want to be in proximity, and you want, or they want to coordinate with them, because you need allies in this work. You need to help the good people be able to talk to the other good people when you're tired of talking. And those are the folks that are in the room together. That's the network. Generally, a network that's full of dominant culture has lots of dominant culture and very few Black, Indigenous people of culture. It's the reverse is true in our communities most times. So cultivating allies for your own sanity is good. So the other piece, the third piece, is that cultivating sanity is your responsibility. Do not let these people drive you nuts. If you have to get support, then get that, but don't get to the place where you feel like you have to do something, and it solely is relying on your cultural experience to do it. It's not fair, and you really do need to have that conversation, because you have to be supported, and otherwise you get burned out in that work. So this is for everybody. It's a great question, Johan. When you are relying on Black, Indigenous people of color to do this work, you got to come correct. You just do. And if you can't, then you got to learn. People ask me when I'm doing my trainings, can they get a discount? No, I'm not giving you no discount on no anti-racism work. Get the hell out of here. I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to cuss today. But no, I'm not doing it. It's not happening. No. And I did do it at one point. I was just like, that's ridiculous. Why am I doing that? I mean, I got to pay taxes and then I give you a discount and I don't have no money. So listen, no discounts on anti-racism work. You got to pay the full ride, and I'm going to treat you fairly. But that's what I would say. You got a lot of steps in there, but all of it is about self-care. And if you haven't got a chance to read the book or get the book, My Grandmother's Hands, I would get it for, your staff or for yourself. And I would read that book. And I would do those practices. And I do read this book and I do those practices. I study somatic abolition with Resla Minica. So those are the things that I would say.
Thank
Does
you.
that help? Good. Yay. Okay, pay the lady. Exactly. You have to pay the sister. You cannot just be up here. I mean, I need all of my coin. And I do good work. So I'm not ashamed of the work that I do. I believe that folks get results working with me. So, but that's fair, right? You do the work, you get paid. Yeah. Respect the craft. Lori says, how collectively learn more about DEI via books and create a common vocabulary to create concerns and issues around DEI in a risk-free environment. Yep. Yeah. Well, and this is but see, Lori, you got a little piece in there that you're gonna have to work out. And it's risk. You're gonna have to take risks. There's no way to do DEI work and stay comfortable. Comfort, when people in dominant culture bodies prioritize comfort, it jeopardizes the well-being of Black and brown people. And I can tell you no greater or show you no greater example than the discomfort that Shaven was feeling when George Floyd would not do what he wanted him to do or act the way he wanted him to act. And that discomfort is translated as fear. And that fear causes Black people, particularly Black men, to get shot by the police. So that risk-free, it sounds a little bit like I have to have safety. I have to have comfort. And what you need is courage. So you need a courageous environment rather than a risk-free environment. You need an environment where you can tell the truth and be able to hold each other accountable and say what needs to be said. And that requires some conflict resiliency, right? That you don't revert to your 5-year-old self because someone is saying something to you and you feel like you're being chastised, and so you shut down. So this isn't that workshop, but usually I go into the polyvagal theory and how the body operates, and you come out of community engagement, and you go into fear, flight, or fawn, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not making fun of it, but that's real. But that piece, that risk-free environment right there's no environment that's risk-free. Can't think of one. Even the most lovey-dovey ones that I can think of, it's not risk-free.
I got a comment.
Go ahead, Catherine.
If you know anything about Harriet Tubman's life, there was no minute, no second, no hour, no day that she did not take risks.
Every day. She
And
had
if we
to.
were every second, if we were like her, this would be a different world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I totally agree.
Well, when we think about Harriet Tubman, like we were just, at the beginning of our time together, we think about Mother Tubman, and we have to think about her as a conductor, and that's primarily what we see. That I can imagine walking 100 miles, but I do know people walk during these days, and it just is amazing to me because I could barely make it 4 blocks. You know what I'm saying? I just be huffing and puffing and tired. I want to go back. I'm reading my phone, and they hoofing it all the way to wherever they going, right? And she did that a number of times, but she didn't do it alone. So many of the people who were part of the Underground Railroad did so anonymously. And so while we see Harriet Tubman, and we all, everybody want to be Harriet Tubman, everybody can't be Harriet Tubman because everybody ain't got the courage that Harriet Tubman can be. But you can support the Underground Railroad. You can be an abolitionist because you can do that in the position that you in. So I just want to call it out because that whole Underground Railroad, that was a network. There were people who, went and like before Harriet got there, told them that she was coming, where to meet her, and what day, and which way to stand, and how would she know who they were? All these kind of things. So anyway, I digress. I love talking about Harriet Tubman. Thank you so much, Catherine. All right. I don't know how we are with time. I know I had like about 20 minutes, so I don't want to end prematurely, but let me see. Do I have more questions? Y'all didn't do my how now wow. Where's my how now wow? Y'all need to put that in the chat. Y'all not doing it. We down to 5 minutes. Thanks. Thank you. good. All right, we finna go. How now, wow. Tell me what you got. What are you leaving with? What are you taking back? The one thing that you definitely are gonna tell people about this workshop, besides it was good, but I don't remember what she said. That one you can't. You can say that, but don't tell me that. Tell somebody else because it's too soon. We need a DEI plan. Yep, gotta have a DEI plan. What else? What else? Thanks, Lori. Yep. As an individual, you need a DEI plan too. Yep. It's a personal journey. You have to make a commitment, a personal commitment to be culturally competent. Mhm. If you can't be Mother Tubman, then what other ways can you support? Join the network. Amen. Amen. Yes, you can get in the party, honey. You know, you can be a team player. It took a lot of people to get Mother Harriet from the south to the north and north to the south. It took a lot of money too, but mainly she had a boatload. She had enough courage for the whole Eastern Seaboard. Yeah. Sheila says, weave DEI into our cultural fabric. We are just a party of 6 right now, but we will get it in. So when we hire, we are in line. Absolutely. You can build that up now because, as you're developing a co-op, people are going to come and go. But somebody's got to carry that torch and carry that flame. Yeah. Uh, yes, I'm tired of telling folks you don't need a DEI plan. Don't let nobody tell you that. Thank you. Tell them that's wrong. So he went to a whole workshop where she had all these slides with all these damn words and stuff on it. And just, oh my goodness, we got to have a plan. Mhm. Everyone has to be involved. Yep. Important to embrace discomfort. Okay to ask for help from other co-ops. Establish metrics. Yes. Yep. You got it, Chris. You got it. People who think you don't need a DEI plan. Yep. Nope. That's exactly right. Go on and invite them to go help somebody else do something. The notion of performative actions and public statements are subject. Yep. No, we don't need people to be performative. We need people to be authentic. Last thing I'll say is that you can also go to my website, LaDonnaSandersRedmond.com, where all of my stuff is there, and I'm supposed to be doing blogs, but I've only done one so far. So one's coming as soon as I can get myself together here and stop doing so many presentations and conferences. But I also offer something coming up in August called the Abolitionist Challenge. We read 6 books in 6 months. Generally, those books are by Black folks talking about abolition. So be on the lookout for that. That is going to be coming up soon. Amanda, my slides will not be posted on the website. That's proprietary information. So what you're going to have to do is look at this presentation. So I got to share, I have to, I got to get paid, y'all. That's my work right there. You know what I mean? All right. It has been fantastic. It has been my pleasure to give you all this presentation, and I hope you enjoy your conference and the rest of your conference and the rest of your day. Yay. Bye-bye. Thank you.